The strangest job offer of my life began with $100 bill and a little boy who looked far too serious for his age. That morning had started like every other morning in Havenbrook. I unlocked the front door of Maple and Ink Books at exactly 8 o'clock, switched on the lamps near the front window, and breathed in the familiar scent of old paper, coffee, and dust. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Well, not technically mine. I only worked there. But after spending nearly 3 years shelving books, recommending novels to retirees, and helping college students find used textbooks they could actually afford, the little bookstore felt more like home than any apartment I had ever rented. I was balancing the register and wondering how I was going to stretch my paycheck until the end of the month when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up automatically, expecting one of our regular customers. Instead, a small boy walked in alone. He couldn't have been older than 7. His dark hair was neatly combed, his expensive navy coat probably cost more than my monthly rent, and his polished shoes clicked softly against the hardwood floor. The strange thing wasn't how wealthy he looked. The strange thing was how determined he looked. He marched directly toward the front counter without hesitation. "Good morning," I said with a smile. "Are you looking for a book?" The boy studied me carefully, like he was interviewing me for a position I didn't know existed. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. I stared at it, then at him, then back at the money. "Ah," I said. "Did you lose this?" "No," he replied. "It's for you." "For me?" He nodded. "Can you be my dad's Omega just for today?" For several seconds I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. "I'm sorry," I said. "What?" The boy pushed the bill closer. "Please. Just for today." I blinked. "Kid, I think you've got the wrong person." "No," he said confidently. "I picked you." Somehow that answer made even less sense. "You picked me for what exactly?" He sighed dramatically, as if I were making this much harder than necessary. "My dad is lonely." "Okay." "And grumpy." "That sounds unfortunate." "And he never smiles." "Also unfortunate." "So I need an Omega." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's not really how that works." "I know." He leaned closer and lowered his voice. I already tried asking him. I had no idea how to respond to that. The boy looked around the bookstore, then back at me. "You seem nice." "Thank you." "And you like books." "Yes." "And you smiled at me." "Most people smile at children." "Not where I live." That answer caught me off guard. For the first time, the confidence in his voice slipped, revealing something sad underneath. Before I could ask another question, a black SUV rolled past the front window. Then another. Both vehicles came to a stop outside the bookstore. My stomach tightened. The boy glanced toward the street and groaned softly. "Oh. Oh." I repeated. "What does that mean?" He winced. "It means they found me." The bookstore door opened so suddenly that the bell nearly snapped off its hook. Several men in dark suits entered first, scanning the room with practiced attention. Then another figure stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly composed. His charcoal overcoat looked tailored to perfection. His expression could have frozen an entire room. The atmosphere changed the second he appeared. Even from across the bookstore, I could feel the weight of his presence. His eyes immediately found the little boy. Relief flashed across his face for only a fraction of a second before disappearing beneath controlled irritation. "Noah," he said calmly. The boy smiled weakly. "Hi, Dad." Then Noah pointed directly at me. "Good news," he announced proudly. "I found one." Every pair of eyes in the bookstore turned toward me at once, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly had the terrifying feeling that my ordinary life had just ended. For a moment, nobody moved. The men standing near the door looked confused. The little boy looked hopeful. The intimidating man in the overcoat looked like he was questioning every decision that had brought him to this bookstore. Unfortunately, all of them were looking at me. "Found one," I repeated weakly. Noah nodded enthusiastically. "He is perfect." The man closed his eyes for a brief second, as though summoning extraordinary patience. When he opened them again, his attention settled on me. His gaze was sharp, controlled, and impossible to ignore. "I apologize for this interruption," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and measured. "My son has an active imagination." "Dad," Noah protested. "This is serious." "I am aware that you believe it is serious." Noah folded his arms. "You never listen." The words hung in the air. Something shifted across the man's face. Not anger, not frustration, Something quieter. Something tired. Before I could make sense of it, Noah turned back toward me. Do not worry. I already paid you. He pointed proudly at the $100 bill. Noah, his father said firmly. You cannot hire people. Why not? Because that is not how relationships work. Then why do grown-ups always say everything is business? The bookstore became completely silent. Even the men in suits seemed uncomfortable. I looked away, pretending to organize a stack of novels that did not need organizing. Noah, however, appeared determined to continue. You work all the time, he said. You never go anywhere except meetings. That is not true. Name one fun thing you did this month. His father opened his mouth, then closed it again. Noah smiled triumphantly. See, I almost laughed. Somehow, I managed not to. The man exhaled slowly and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Noah, we are leaving. Not until you talk to Julian. I blinked. You remember my name? Of course. Noah looked offended. I chose you. The confidence in his voice made me smile despite myself. The man noticed. For the first time, his attention lingered on me. Not suspiciously, not aggressively, simply studying me. You are Julian? He asked. Julian Frost. I am Dominic Voss. The name hit me instantly. Everyone in the city knew that name. Dominic Voss owned companies, charities, hotels, and half the downtown skyline if local rumors were even remotely accurate. He was one of the most influential men in the state. Suddenly, the expensive vehicles outside made perfect sense. My stomach tightened. Nice to meet you, I managed. Likewise. The reply sounded polite, but distant. Noah groaned dramatically. You are doing the robot voice again. One of the suited men coughed suspiciously, clearly hiding laughter. Dominic shot him a glance that restored his professionalism immediately. Then Noah did something unexpected. He stepped closer to me and quietly asked, Do you have plans today? Not really. Good. Dominic immediately shook his head. No, you did not even hear my idea. I heard enough. Just lunch. No, one lunch. Noah, one lunch, and I will stop asking for a whole week. Dominic stared at him. Noah stared back. The negotiation lasted several seconds. I had the distinct impression that this conversation had happened many times before. Finally, Dominic sighed. It was the sound of a man losing a battle he never wanted to fight. One lunch, he said. Noah practically lit up. Really? One lunch? Noah turned toward me so quickly, I almost stepped backward. See? I told you it would work. I should have said no. Every sensible instinct I possessed was screaming at me to say no. Yet as I looked at the excitement on Noah's face and the exhaustion hidden behind Dominic's composed expression, the answer refused to come. Somewhere deep inside, curiosity had already won. 30 minutes later, I found myself sitting in the back seat of a luxury SUV wondering how a normal workday had transformed into this. Noah sat beside me looking completely satisfied with himself, while Dominic occupied the seat across from us, reviewing something on a tablet. The city rolled past the tinted windows as we headed toward our destination. Every few minutes Noah glanced between us like a scientist monitoring an experiment. Stop doing that, Dominic finally said without looking up. Doing what? Noah asked innocently. Whatever it is you are doing. I am making sure nobody leaves. I laughed before I could stop myself. Dominic looked up. For a second our eyes met. There was surprise in his expression, as if he had not expected me to laugh. Then the moment passed, and his attention returned to the tablet. 20 minutes later we arrived at the city zoo. Noah practically launched himself out of the vehicle the second the door opened. Come on, he shouted. We have to see everything. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the glass entrance as families moved through the gates carrying maps and snacks. Children ran ahead while exhausted parents tried to keep up. Noah fit right in. Dominic did not. He stood out immediately. His tailored coat, composed posture, and constant awareness of everything around him made him look more like a visiting executive than a father spending a Saturday at the zoo. Yet despite his serious appearance, Noah reached for his hand automatically. Dominic took it without hesitation. Something about that simple gesture caught my attention. What? Dominic asked suddenly. I realized he had noticed me watching. Nothing. That did not look like nothing. I was just surprised. By what? I glanced toward Noah. You seem different with him. Dominic followed my gaze. Noah was studying a zoo map with complete concentration. The corner of Dominic's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. He is my son, he said simply. We spent the next 2 hours following Noah from exhibit to exhibit. He wanted to see everything. Penguins, tigers, sea lions, red pandas. At one point, he spent nearly 15 minutes trying to convince a flamingo to become his friend. The flamingo remained unconvinced. I quickly learned something important. Noah talked constantly. Dominic barely talked at all. Somehow the two balanced each other perfectly. During lunch, we sat outside, near a small pond surrounded by oak trees. Noah attacked his chicken tenders with impressive determination while Dominic answered a phone call. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Whatever had required his attention was apparently resolved immediately. When he returned to the table, Noah frowned. Work again. Briefly. You promised. Dominic sighed. I know. You always know. The disappointment in Noah's voice was small, but noticeable. Dominic looked genuinely frustrated with himself. You are right, he admitted. Noah blinked. I am. Yes. Wow. I nearly choked on my drink. Noah grinned. That never happens. For the first time, Dominic actually smiled. It was small, brief, gone almost instantly, but it transformed his entire face. Noah noticed too. His eyes widened. Then he looked at me like I had personally accomplished something remarkable. I had not done anything. Yet for the rest of lunch, Noah seemed happier than ever. As the afternoon continued, I began noticing things that had nothing to do with expensive cars or powerful reputations. I noticed how Noah constantly checked to make sure his father was nearby. I noticed how Dominic always knew exactly where Noah was, even when he appeared distracted. Most of all, I noticed the loneliness hiding beneath both of them. One had lost his ability to relax. The other had lost someone to laugh with. By the time the sun began sinking lower in the sky, I was starting to understand why a 7-year-old boy had walked into a bookstore carrying $100 and a plan. When we finally left the zoo, the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gold. Noah had fallen unusually quiet during the drive back. At first, I assumed he was simply tired after spending an entire afternoon running from one exhibit to another, but the longer the silence lasted, the more I noticed something was different. The cheerful energy that had carried him through the day seemed to be fading. When the SUV stopped in front of my apartment building, I reached for the door handle. Thank you for today, I said sincerely. I had fun. Noah immediately sat upright. Wait. I turned back. What is it? He hesitated. Can you come again sometime? Before I could answer, Dominic spoke. Noah. There was no warning in his voice, but Noah lowered his eyes anyway. Sorry. The reaction felt strange. Not fearful, just disappointed. I offered a small smile. Maybe. Noah brightened slightly. Really? Maybe, I repeated. If my schedule allows it. That seemed enough for him. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I glanced back one last time. Noah was watching me through the window. The expression on his face stayed with me long after the vehicle disappeared around the corner. The next morning, I returned to my normal routine at the bookstore. Customers came and went. Deliveries arrived. A college student spent 20 minutes debating between two mystery novels. Everything should have felt normal again. Instead, I kept thinking about Noah. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, the bell above the door chimed. I looked up automatically and nearly laughed. Noah stood there holding a backpack almost as large as he was. How did you get here? I asked. Driver. He pointed outside. Sure enough, a black vehicle was parked across the street. Does your father know? Probably. That answer was not reassuring. Noah wandered through the bookstore as if he had been visiting for years. Eventually, he settled into a reading corner near the back window. For almost an hour, he quietly flipped through books while I worked. It was surprisingly peaceful. Then I noticed something. Every few minutes, Noah would pull a small photograph from his backpack and stare at it. The first time, I ignored it. The second time, I became curious. The third time, concern got the better of me. Who is that? I asked gently. Noah looked down at the picture. For several seconds, he said nothing. My other parent, he finally answered. The sadness in his voice caught me off guard. You miss them? He nodded. Every day. I sat beside him. I am sorry. Noah stared at the photograph again. Dad used to smile more. My chest tightened. Before everything changed. He traced the edge of the picture with one finger. Now he works all the time. Maybe he is trying his best. I know. Noah's voice became very quiet. That is what makes it sad. I did not know how to respond to that. Sometimes children understood things adults spent years avoiding. Noah slipped the photograph back into his backpack. Do you know what scares me? He asked. What? He looked out the window toward the busy street beyond the glass. I think Dad is lonely when nobody is looking. The honesty of that confession hit harder than I expected. Suddenly, the $100, the plan, the zoo trip, and all his determination made perfect sense. Noah had never been trying to find someone for himself. He had been trying to save his father from being alone. After that afternoon, something unexpected happened. Noah started appearing in my life with surprising regularity. Sometimes he arrived at the bookstore after school carrying a new question about dinosaurs or space exploration. Other times he arrived with a stack of books he insisted I recommend personally because, according to him, my choices were better than the internet. At first I assumed Dominic would eventually put a stop to the visits. Instead, they continued. A week passed, then another. Before I realized it, Noah had become part of my routine. Every Tuesday, he sat by the front window reading adventure novels. Every Thursday, he helped organize the children's section, although his version of organizing involved creating categories such as dragons, cool dragons, and extremely cool dragons. Somehow the customers loved it. One rainy afternoon, I was helping an elderly customer find a gardening guide when the bookstore door opened. I glanced up and froze. Dominic stood inside. Water droplets clung to his dark coat. The familiar, composed expression was firmly in place. Yet somehow he looked less intimidating than the first day we met. "Good afternoon," I said. "Good afternoon." He looked around the bookstore. Noah insisted I come inside this time. That sounds like Noah. A faint trace of amusement crossed his face. Yes. We found Noah sitting cross-legged on the floor between two bookshelves, completely absorbed in a fantasy novel. Dominic watched him quietly for a moment. There was something different in his expression. Less distance. Less exhaustion. "He seems happy," I said. Dominic nodded. "He talks about this place constantly. I hope that is a good thing." "It is." The answer came immediately. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Customers moved through the aisles. Everything felt strangely peaceful. "Thank you," Dominic said unexpectedly. I blinked. For what? For making time for him. His gaze followed Noah across the room. He has not laughed this much in a long time. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I suddenly understood how rare those words probably were. "He makes it easy," I admitted. "He is a great kid." Dominic smiled slightly. He would be very pleased to hear that. Over the following weeks, the boundaries between our lives continued to blur. Noah invited me to a school art show, then a weekend science fair, then a charity picnic organized by one of Dominic's foundations. Each time I expected to feel out of place. Each time Noah made certain I did not. What surprised me most was Dominic. Beneath the reputation, the influence, and the endless responsibilities was a man who listened carefully whenever Noah spoke. A man who never missed a school event no matter how busy he seemed. A man trying very hard to be everything his son needed while quietly ignoring his own loneliness. One evening, after a community fundraiser ended, Noah walked a few steps ahead of us carrying a balloon animal he was determined to preserve forever. The city lights reflected across the sidewalk as people drifted toward their cars. "You know," Dominic said quietly, "you have become important to him." I watched Noah laughing at something only he understood. "He has become important to me too." The admission felt simple, honest. Yet when I looked at Dominic, something unreadable passed through his eyes. For the first time, I realized this was no longer just about helping a lonely child. Somewhere along the way, all three of us had started becoming something neither Noah nor I had planned for. The first sign that something was wrong appeared on a Thursday afternoon. Noah was supposed to meet me at the bookstore after school like he always did. 3 o'clock came and went. Then 3:30. By 4 o'clock, I found myself glancing toward the front window every few minutes. It was unusual enough that I finally checked my phone. There was a message from Dominic. "Noah is with me today. Emergency meeting. Sorry for the short notice." Relief settled over me, followed by an emotion I was not ready to examine too closely. Disappointment. Over the next few days, Dominic seemed busier than ever. Noah still visited when he could, but the easy rhythm we had developed was beginning to strain. Phone calls interrupted dinners. Meetings appeared without warning. Plans changed at the last minute. Noah tried not to complain, yet I could see it wearing on him. One Saturday afternoon, we attended a small outdoor community festival together. Noah spent nearly 20 minutes deciding which flavor of ice cream to buy before finally choosing chocolate. We were sitting near the fountain in the town square when his smile suddenly disappeared. "What is it?" I asked. Noah pointed across the plaza. Several adults were speaking quietly while occasionally glancing in our direction. Their expressions were not hostile, just curious. Still, Noah seemed uncomfortable. "They always stare," he muttered. "Who?" "People." He looked down at his melting ice cream. "They stare at Dad, too." Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. "Dominic." "Excuse me for a second," I said. I stepped away to answer. Dominic sounded unusually tense. "Where are you?" "The community festival." A pause followed. "Stay with Noah." "Of course. I am on my way." The call ended before I could ask any questions. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up near the square. Dominic emerged looking more unsettled than I had ever seen him. His gaze immediately found Noah. Only after confirming his son was safe did he seem able to breathe normally. "Dad." Noah frowned. "What happened?" Dominic crouched beside him. "Nothing happened. You look worried." Dominic hesitated. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Noah studied him carefully. "You were scared." Dominic did not answer. The silence said enough. That evening, after Noah had been taken home, I received another message. "Thank you for staying with him." I stared at the words for several seconds before replying. He did not need me. He had you. The response arrived almost immediately. "You would be surprised." A week later, I finally understood what he meant. The bookstore was hosting a weekend reading event for local children. The place was crowded with families, balloons, and stacks of picture books. Noah had volunteered to help. Halfway through the afternoon, one of the younger children became separated from his parents and burst into tears. Before any adult could react, Noah knelt beside him and started talking softly. Within minutes, the child had calmed down. Watching from across the room, I noticed something remarkable. Noah was doing exactly what I always did for him, offering comfort, offering patience, offering presence. Later that evening, after the event ended, Noah helped me stack chairs. "You know," I said, "that was very kind." He shrugged. "I learned from you." The words hit me harder than they should have. At that moment, the bookstore door opened. Dominic stepped inside. He had probably arrived only seconds earlier, but judging from his expression, he had heard everything. Neither of us spoke. Across the quiet bookstore, our eyes met. For the first time, I saw something in Dominic's gaze that went beyond gratitude. Something deeper. Something neither of us seemed ready to name. A few days after that evening, Dominic asked if I would join him for coffee after Noah's piano lesson. The invitation sounded casual, but something in his voice suggested otherwise. We ended up sitting at a quiet cafe overlooking the river while Noah attended a special practice session inside the community arts center across the street. For several minutes, neither of us spoke much. The comfortable silence felt different from the awkward tension that had existed when we first met. Finally, Dominic looked out the window and said, "There is something I have never told you." I waited. His expression grew distant. After Noah lost his other parent, everything changed. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was impossible to miss. I thought if I worked harder, if I controlled every detail of our lives, I could protect him from more pain. He gave a faint, humorless laugh. Instead, I made our world smaller. I listened quietly. Noah stopped asking me to smile after a while. He continued. "Children adapt. They learn what questions will never be answered." My chest tightened. "He still believes in you." Dominic nodded slowly. "That is what scares me." I frowned. "Why would that scare you?" He looked directly at me. "Because he deserves better than a father who spent years hiding from his own grief." For the first time since I had known him, the carefully constructed walls around Dominic seemed to crack. Not dramatically, not completely, just enough for me to glimpse the lonely man underneath. The man Noah had seen long before anyone else. "You are not hiding now," I said quietly. Dominic looked surprised by the certainty in my voice. No, I smiled slightly. "You came to school events. You sat through science fairs. You learned the names of every character in his favorite books even when you pretended you had not. That does not sound like someone hiding." For several seconds he said nothing. Then he lowered his gaze and shook his head as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. "You always make things sound simpler than they are. Maybe because sometimes they are simpler." Before he could answer, we both noticed movement outside. Noah was standing near the entrance of the arts center, waving enthusiastically through the glass. We immediately stood and headed across the street. By the time we reached him, he was smiling again. Yet later that evening, something happened that neither Dominic nor I noticed. After dinner, Noah came downstairs looking for a book he had left in the living room. As he approached the hallway, he overheard part of a conversation between Dominic and me. We were discussing the future. Nothing dramatic. Nothing secret. I simply admitted that I sometimes wondered whether I truly belonged in their lives. Dominic responded so quietly that I almost missed it. You belong more than you realize. Unfortunately, Noah only heard the first part. He only heard me questioning whether I belonged. The next morning, he seemed unusually quiet. At breakfast, he barely touched his pancakes. During the drive to school, he stared out the window. When I asked if everything was all right, he smiled and said yes. But the smile never reached his eyes. As the school building came into view, Noah looked back at us from the rear seat. Do you think people leave because they want to? He asked suddenly. Neither of us expected the question. Dominic glanced at me before answering. Sometimes people leave because they think it is the right thing to do. Noah lowered his eyes. Oh. Then he stepped out of the vehicle and disappeared through the school doors. Neither Dominic nor I realized it then, but that single conversation had planted a fear in Noah's heart, and before long that fear would change everything. The call came at 4:20 in the afternoon. I was helping a customer at the register when my phone began vibrating repeatedly. The screen displayed Dominic's name. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. Noah is missing. Every sound around me seemed to disappear. What happened? He never came out after school. Dominic's voice was controlled, but barely. The staff thought he had already been picked up. He is not with any of his friends. My heart dropped. I am coming. 20 minutes later, I arrived at Dominic's house. The atmosphere felt completely different from the warm family dinners we had shared there. Staff members moved quickly through the hallways. Phones rang constantly. Dominic stood in the center of the living room, staring at a map spread across the table. The exhaustion I had seen before was gone. In its place was fear. Real fear. Have you found anything? I asked. Dominic shook his head. Nothing. Then one of the staff members approached holding a folded piece of paper. Sir, this was found in Noah's room. Dominic took it immediately. His hands froze the moment he opened it. What is it? I asked quietly. He handed me the note. The handwriting was unmistakably Noah's. Dad, I think Julian is leaving because of me. If I stop being a problem, maybe both of you can be happy. I am sorry. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then the truth hit me like a wave. He heard us. Dominic closed his eyes. The conversation. He misunderstood. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I know. It was the first time I had ever seen him lose control. Not anger. Not frustration. Pure heartbreak. We spent the next several hours searching everywhere Noah loved. The bookstore. The zoo. The park near his school. The library. The ice cream shop he visited every summer. Each place brought another disappointment. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. Streetlights flickered on across the city. Still no Noah. Around 8 o'clock, we stopped near the riverfront. Dominic stared at the water in silence. This is my fault. No, I should have realized he was struggling. Dominic. I promised myself I would never fail him. I stepped closer. You did not fail him. He looked at me. The pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. Then why is he gone? Before I could answer, a memory surfaced. A conversation from weeks earlier. Noah sitting by the bookstore window holding the photograph of his other parent. Looking toward the river. Talking about loneliness. Suddenly I knew. The arts center. Dominic frowned. What? The rooftop garden. His expression changed instantly. 10 minutes later, we were racing toward the community arts center. The building was closed for the evening, but the rooftop garden remained accessible through a side entrance. We climbed the stairs 2 at a time. When we reached the top, I saw a small figure sitting on a bench beneath strings of decorative lights. Noah. He was staring at the city skyline. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Dominic crossed the distance between them. Noah looked up. The moment he saw his father, his brave expression shattered. Dad. Dominic dropped to one knee and wrapped both arms around him. Do not ever do that again. Noah started crying immediately. I am sorry. No, Dominic held him tighter. I am sorry. Noah pulled back slightly. You are? Yes. His voice trembled. Because I should have told you a long time ago that nothing in this world could ever make me want less time with you. Tears streamed down Noah's face. Then his eyes shifted toward me. And Julian? I stepped forward. I am not leaving, Noah. The relief that appeared on his face was so immediate that it broke my heart. Under the glow of the rooftop lights, the three of us stood together, and for the first time it felt like we were finally telling each other the truth. The months that followed felt different. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because nobody was pretending anymore. Noah no longer carried the quiet fear that everyone around him would disappear. Dominic stopped burying himself in endless work every time difficult emotions surfaced. And I stopped standing at the edge of their lives wondering whether I belonged there. One Saturday morning nearly a year later, I unlocked the front door of a bookstore that looked very different from the one where this story began. The old shop had eventually expanded into a larger location across town. Sunlight poured through wide front windows. Comfortable reading corners filled the space. Children laughed near the picture book section. The sign above the entrance now read Brooks and Voss Books. Every time I saw it, I still smiled. "You are late," Noah announced dramatically as he appeared from behind a bookshelf. At 8 years old, he had somehow become even more confident than before. "I opened the store 3 minutes ago." "Exactly." He folded his arms. "Late." I laughed. "You sound like your father." "Dad says punctuality is important." "Your father also owns 6 watches." "That proves my point." Before I could answer, the front door opened again. Dominic stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked toward us and immediately smiled. The sight still caught me off guard sometimes. Not because the smile was rare anymore, but because I remembered a time when Noah thought he might never see it again. Dominic handed me a coffee before turning to his son. "Are you helping customers or creating problems?" "Both." "At least he is honest," I said. Dominic shook his head with amused resignation. Later that afternoon, after the bookstore closed, we gathered in the small office upstairs. Noah had insisted on showing us a school project. He carefully placed a large poster board on the desk. "This is my family history assignment." Dominic and I exchanged a glance. "All right," I said. "Let us see it." Noah turned the board around proudly. There were photographs from every stage of the past year. School events, holidays, bookstore openings, community festivals, family dinners. In the center was a photograph taken at the rooftop garden shortly after the night we found him. Looking at it brought back every emotion from that evening. "This one is my favorite," Noah said quietly. Dominic studied the photograph for a long moment. "Mine too." Then Noah pointed toward the bottom of the project where he had written a short paragraph. "Read it." I leaned closer. The words were written in careful handwriting. "Sometimes families begin in ordinary ways. Sometimes they begin because someone decides not to give up on another person. Mine started because I wanted my dad to be happy." For a moment, nobody spoke. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Dominic placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "That is a very good project." Noah smiled. "I know." We laughed at the same time. The sound filled the room with a warmth that once would have seemed impossible. As the evening sun faded beyond the windows, I looked at the family we had become. Not perfect, not planned, but real. Years ago, a lonely little boy had walked into a bookstore carrying $100 and a ridiculous idea. He thought he was hiring someone for a single day. None of us realized he was building a future. And in the end, the person who changed all of our lives was never the powerful father, the struggling bookseller, or the circumstances that brought us together. It was a child who refused to stop believing that the people he loved deserved happiness. What would you have done if you were in this situation? Tell us in the comments. If you love Alpha and Omega stories filled with passion, loyalty, heartbreak, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.